Hello, everybody. Happy Friday, and thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to be here. My name's Vicky. I'm currently an associate trainer with Hoarding Disorders UK. A little bit about me. My background is that I'm a qualified social worker. I'm still a practicing social worker. I'm also what we call an approved mental health professional, an AMP. And I joined Hoarding Disorders UK about 2 years ago due to a long-standing passion and interest around hoarding, raising awareness, and working with this fantastic company to kind of spread the word a little bit really about what hoarding is and how we can share the knowledge and passion that we have as a team. So that's me. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Vicky. Can I just check you can all
I
see?
can,
Great,
yes.
thank you. I just need to sense check that. Hi, everyone. My name is Kat. I am a co-director at Hoarding Disorders UK, working alongside Vicky and other colleagues. We'll get into a little bit about who we are in terms of an organisation, but just a little bit of my background. I am autistic and have ADHD. I don't speak on behalf of all autistic people or people who have ADHD brains, but I can certainly bring that kind of lens to the conversations today, and it is relevant. I previously was a director for a national children's charity, so a lot of my focus is around looking at children and young people and communities, looking at how do we support people in a trauma-informed way, and also really highlighting the need for lived experience and voices, storytelling, etc. I am a mother alongside working with this wonderful team, and I have my own private consultancy too. But we are very much wanting to ensure that we can give you uh, the best possible experience today based on our collective expertise. I'm also a member of the UK Hoarding Steering Group, as well as a non-academic member of the Possessions and Hoarding Collective at Anglia Ruskin University. So a lot of the work that I'm involved in is around research and looking at ways of developing new support processes. So, Vicky, shall we start?
We shall.
Do we
Thank
want to
you.
do a few little bits of housekeeping first, quickly?
Can do. Yes,
Okay.
perfect.
So, Vicky and I will not be monitoring the chat. Our colleagues from Healthwatch will be doing that for us very kindly. So, as we go along, if you do have sort of questions or things that you want to put in there, that's absolutely fine. We will do our very best to get through those at the end. There is a section there for us to do Q&A. But we will try and move this on at a pace and hopefully give you everything that you need today. Over to you,
So
Vicky.
thank you. So, who are we? And I think just as a bit of an opening, as Kat said, we'll try and do our absolute best today to give you lots of information and awareness. This is absolutely a topic that Kat and I and the whole team could spend an entire day, if not a few, talking about. So, this is really a whistle stop tour. So, Hoarding Disorders UK is a community interest company. We are quite small, there's probably 5 or 6 of us that work in the team, and we kind of cover the whole of the UK really, or that we're all scattered around everywhere from down in Devon to the Midlands to up in York. So we are really scattered all over the place, really. And we try and come together as much as we can virtually and in person just to kind of come together, share knowledge, share expertise, share skill, and just develop Hoarding Disorders UK and what we're trying to achieve. But our goal is to explore, and what we're going to look at today is what hoarding is and give you that awareness and that information from what we know, the information research that's out there, but also what hoarding is not. And I think it's really, really clear that we kind of show some parallels and similarities, but differences to that as well. We're going to explore the why, so why people may engage in hoarding behaviours, why they may find themselves living in really busy and full homes, and some of the how. So, how has that behaviour come to occur? What's happened in people's lives? What is evidence showing us? And what is it telling us as research is starting to gain momentum in this field? And then we're going to move on a little bit into what good support looks like for people. So, how can we, again, with all the research, evidence base, what we know, how can we best support people? And that kind of comes from both a professional standpoint, but also we're quite aware that today this session has been opened out to members of the public. So, there may be family, friends, loved ones who are on this call today. So, we're kind of going to pitch that at a bit of a broad awareness, really, of how we can best support somebody who is displaying hoarding behaviours from lots of different angles. And
Mm.
then we're going to move on to, as Kat said, a question and answer session at the end, and we will do our absolute best to answer as many questions as we can. But we have allocated that time so that you can ask away, ask us things that you might have in mind.
Fabulous, thank you. And I think we will, as we go along, also touch on and weave in some kind of focus on language as well. This was definitely a learning point around this particular webinar, around the title, etc. So I think we'll touch on, the sensitivity around language, and what might be the best way of approaching that with loved ones or people that you may be working with directly. So Vicky's already touched on this a little bit, but we wanted to just qualify, I suppose, our focus, what our core mission is, as a not-for-profit organisation. So it was first founded in 2014 by our wonderful colleague Joe Cook, who is a really trusted voice in this area, a published author as well. Some of you may be familiar with some of her books. Very useful tools to have in your toolkit, regardless of your role, whether it's loved one or not. But I suppose that the bit that we really want to highlight as well is around the spectrum of hoarding disorder, hoarding behaviours, and that actually there's this notion of chronic disorganisation, which is not the same as hoarding disorder or hoarding behaviours, but can present in a similar way. But the approach to supporting someone with that is different. But we don't sort of discard that. We have to, as an organisation, say we need to look at the whole spectrum of these things and how they present. So what do we do? We've also mentioned already about trauma-informed working, but that is very much at the heart of everything that we talk about, advise, advocate for. The kindness, the practical kind of input, that's the kind of thing that we offer. But more so, our focus is around providing advice and guidance, specialist input, either for individuals or for professionals. We provide consultancy in those areas. Education and awareness, we do that using a whole suite of different types of resources, from light touch awareness to much more enhanced specialist skills and support. We also are massive advocates, I haven't skipped this, but we are massive advocates for the provision of peer support and support groups. So we provide those types of spaces completely free of charge, and they are hugely important. We will come on to talk about that area at a later point in the slide deck. And the final thing that we very much support is research and innovation. We are currently doing a huge amount of work around cost modelling, and looking at how we can make the cost argument, if you like, for earlier support and intervention and investment. So, Vicky,
Thank
history of
you.
hoarding.
So, if we think about, and this is kind of edging into the what is hoarding really, but when we think about actually what is hoarding and where has it come from, it's not something that's new. And when we dig back and we look back, actually, even in the days when human beings came onto the planet, there's a kind of ethos of collect and find, keeping items that would be of use to us, keeping items that we know would serve as a purpose. It's if we think about even, mammal animals, they forage and find, they keep things that help them to build their home, build their nest, keep them safe, things that they can utilize. Things about winter reserves. So, in times of different climates and different points in the year, people collect and keep items that will serve them a purpose over time and over harsh winter months. There's things around wartime when people have had to be really frivolous, and when people have had to keep hold of items because there wasn't a lot out there. Think about rations, and certainly when we think about maybe older generations, they have absolutely had to hold on to things because they haven't been available in war times. So there is a real history to hoarding in terms of keeping things so that we have use of them and we don't have to spend money unnecessarily, so that we can said reuse items. And actually, we all keep things. We all naturally have this instinct within us as a human behavior to hold on to things because they're sentimental to us, they matter to us, we like them. They're appealing, they're aesthetically nice to look at, they mean something to us, they tell stories. We all have things in our homes that remind us of fond memories. So there's a real history and baseline understanding of what hoarding is, and that it's something that we all do to a degree. It's something that we can all relate to in some way. Certainly, when I tell people that I do this work, people are very, very quick to come with forth with a story and saying, "Oh, so and so that I know hoards," or "so and so that I know hoards." And it's about unpicking, is that actually hoarding, as what we're going to go into, hoarding as a mental health condition, which it is now recognised as, or is it just part of what humans do? Is it more about keeping items, maybe collecting, maybe holding on to them? Maybe there is that, for again, an older generation or even maybe a younger generation, actually everything has a use. So we really have to, when we're thinking about what hoarding is and where it's come from, unpick a little bit about to what degree is someone's possessions and their treasures and their home part of that human behavior and something we all do, versus something that actually is a little bit of a concern now, and their homes are becoming really full. But if we just go to the next slide, there's a few key prominent figures and cases, I guess, that people may or may not be aware of. The Collier brothers and Richard Wallace. And if it is something that you wanted to go and have a little Google of after today's session, they are really, really fascinating people, and their lives are truly fascinating. Just as a brief overview, so the Collier brothers, two gentlemen that lived in New York, down Fifth Avenue in New York, and they lived in this huge, huge, huge house. It kind of, whenever I've looked at the house, it kind of always reminds me of the house that Carrie Bradshaw steps out of in the film The Sex and the City. It's this huge, big, you know,
Stone.
townhouse.
Mm.
Yeah, and there was lots of things that happened in their lives. They were very well-educated gentlemen. One of them had a law degree. Both brothers, one had a law degree, one was an engineer. Their parents worked. Their dad was a doctor. Mum was into kind of theatre production. And their father died. Mum and dad had separated in their earlier years, and they lived with their mum in this house. And then when mum passed away, they continued to live in the house together. Neither of them married. They continued to work, very active in their local community. It's understood that they did Sunday schools for the local children. But around the time of the Great Depression, the environment and the society in which they lived, it changed a lot. Kind of increased crime rates, increased deprivation in the area, and they kind of went into the house a little bit. They isolated themselves, and over time, their house became really full, really, really full. And these weren't gentlemen that didn't have money. They all of a sudden stopped paying their bills, they stopped paying their mortgage. It's understood from literature that I've read that when they were on about taking the house off them because they hadn't paid the mortgage, they went to the house, the bank, and they just wrote them a check out and paid the mortgage off. So they had money, but they just isolated themselves within this home. And it kind of came to a head a little bit when one of the brothers became quite unwell and the other cared for him. And then one day they couldn't find them. Nobody had seen them for ages. And it turned out that actually one of the brother who had the ill health, he died in the property. And when they couldn't find his other brother, when they were looking eventually when they got inside the house, one of the tunnels that they used to crawl through this property had collapsed in on him. So they both sadly died in this property. That when they eventually got in and saw the massive items in there, it's estimated there was around 120 tons of items in that property. And there was cars, engines, miles of silk, pianos, countless newspapers, treasures, absolute treasures from mum and dad's world and their land. But there was so much stuff in this property that on some of the other pictures you might see that people are having to climb from the windows from the outside to get in. Eventually, the property was so structurally unsound it had to be demolished. But really fascinating to have a look at. And again, when we say what is hoarding, is it something new? No, it's not. And Richard Wallace is kind of a similar equivalent of a gentleman in the UK who lives in a very full home. The council wanted to take him to court so that they could clear his home and his garden because of how it was, impact on the neighbourhood and the risks and everything. And he actually won the case against his council and said, "Basically, leave my home alone. My home is my castle. A man's home is his castle." So, two really interesting cases to have a go away and read about if you're wanting to understand a little bit more about what hoarding is. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you. And just if people saw the name Andy Warhol pop up on
Oh, yeah.
the previous slide, it's probably just to sort of give you the lens of, who gets to decide what is problematic, who gets to define what is too much. And sometimes, depending on what your role is or how it's sort of perceived, it can be allowed. So Andy Warhol, very famous for having huge amounts of things as part of his collection and muse, if you like, and inspiration for his artwork. But that's been seen as, well, of course, because he's a creative mind. But not everyone is afforded that kind of same level of I suppose, understanding. So it's just a point around, sometimes we can see things differently depending on what people's roles are or who they are. So just a quick one. Whilst we can't see the chat, if you wanted to have a little go at defining what is hoarding disorder, and we're very deliberate in the phrase hoarding disorder there, by the way. If you wanted to put any of your thoughts in the chat and see what your ideas are. And the picture that's on the screen here as well is actually from a a real a real case, a real property, a real person's home. Uh, and it's been really interesting to see the journey that they've been on. But it's also worth just having a look at this and thinking, what can you see? What is it that you see in this picture? What's it telling you? Do you know what room that is in this person's house as well? Anything coming through on the chat, colleagues? We will move on, but
Yeah, not yet about the actual
question.
picture there, but just some comments around how there might be a link to kind of grief potentially and loss being a trigger.
Yes, that's really astute. Okay,
Yes.
thank you for those inputs. We'll come on to now what is hoarding disorder. So, Vicky.
Thanks, Kat. Thank you. So, really importantly, hoarding has now been recognised as its own standalone mental health condition. It is formally recognised as a diagnosable mental health condition, and that's been since 2018 in the UK. And I'll just read this bit. What we've steered away from is putting the clinical diagnosis within this because you can have a read of that by the ICD or the DSM, which are the diagnostic manuals. But in summary, it's defined as a pattern of accumulating possessions to the point that the living space can no longer be used for their intended purpose, combined with an inability to discard of items regardless of their value. And it's interesting because I think for me that diagnosis and that behavior still isn't conclusive. It's not concrete. It's still on a spectrum of, and again, as Kat said, who defines what is an accumulation? Who defines to what point you can no longer use a room as its intended purpose? And who defines the value of items? So it still leaves it open a bit, but it's really helpful, I guess, to understand that it's been recognised that this is a mental health concern for people. It's similar to depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia. It is given the recognition that sometimes people just can't manage their possessions very well. Sometimes people really struggle with that, and there is a reason that underpins that. So please do bear in mind now that I said it is not a lifestyle choice. And it is not, it used to be previously under the obsessive compulsive disorder banner. And again, they've now been separated. So OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, still remains a mental health condition. And now hoarding has been given its own recognition as a mental health condition. And these are a little bit more of some of those defining characteristics of that diagnosis. As we said, it's an accumulation of a large amount of items in a way that impacts daily living or the lives of others. So thinking about people live in these homes on their own. Sometimes people live there with children, with families, with other loved ones. It's difficulties organising or managing the possessions. So sometimes possessions could be quite neat, could be quite orderly. Sometimes they may just be quite disorganised. And the volume of that as well can mean that, again, that impacts on how you move through a home, how you may manage possessions so that you can get access to bedrooms or to living rooms. And it's a strong emotional attachment to items, making discarding really, really difficult. So, as I said at the beginning, people see their items as treasures, people see them as memories. And absolutely, we all have absolute treasures in our home that we wouldn't want anybody to touch. But when you form this level of attachment to items because they have meaning, they have value to you, that is where the attachment comes from. That's that strong emotional attachment. And again,
sorry, it was the distressing part that needs to be
yes,
really, really highlighted, doesn't it? It's the level of distress.
it is. And distress for people can be absolutely that outward display of distress. People get very visibly upset and distressed, but also we have to think about distress being something that people can feel inwards. Not everybody shows distress in the same way. So it's being alert to how that attachment to items can impact on that person and what you see, and how it upsets somebody if the suggestion of disposing of the items is made. The persistent urge to acquire more. So even though people may know that their homes are really full and busy, it is that desire to still want more and more items, to fulfill that emotional need to give them that comfort out of things because they're attached to their items. And so they're the positive and comforting feeling that people get through obtaining new items. It meets a need for people. Having a lot of items and living in a busy home meets a need. Although it may present with the difficulty of not being able to navigate through a home very well, for that person, it's recognizing that it is a coping strategy in some ways, and it is meeting a need for them. And this is why it's so important that we now recognize hoarding as that mental health condition, because it comes with all those different layers of need with it, with anxiety, attachment, distress. It's so important that we now see it as that mental health condition that it is.
Self-soothing, we often refer to this as a coping mechanism that's just gone wrong. Yeah, so that's one way of looking at it. We felt that it was important to provide a little bit of information. What do we know? Well, we still are learning about hoarding behaviours, hoarding disorder. As you can see, 2018 really wasn't that long ago, was it, in terms of it being recognised in the UK as a mental health challenge. So we're still learning, but the best that we know at the moment is that it is believed that between 2.5% and 6% of the overall population in the UK are living in very full homes. So that is the equivalent, if we want to, because sometimes those abstract percentages don't really mean very much. If you looked at what that meant housing wise, that's more than 4 million households. And we believe, and this is a widely held view, that that is a massive underestimation as well. And I think you can just sense check that by, if you had a conversation over the dining room table at home or with someone that you maybe work with or a friend, everybody seems to know somebody or of a situation that could be deemed as experiencing signs of hoarding behaviours. So, by virtue of that, we know that this is a much bigger issue than most of us will appreciate. I suppose as a useful comparison, we can say that, we know that the prevalence is more than the prevalence of OCD and schizophrenia combined, but it doesn't get that same kind of focus or funding or infrastructure support. There is no specific funding for this area. We believe it affects men and women equally, but you're much more likely, as with any other emotional well-being or mental health support need, to see women seeking support than you would with men. But what I would say is I think that there's still a lot to be learned about, what does this look like across different communities? What does this look like across the different genders and different characteristics? And it is normally, there's a sort of generalization that it would be associated with more mature individuals. But we know that this, when you speak to someone, they will often say, well, actually, there were signs of this when I was younger, much younger. Maybe it started when I was in my teens, or it started as a result of a particular thing that happened earlier on in my life. I could see signs of that. So we readily get phone calls, emails requesting support for families where there are young children who they are concerned. I think I'm seeing this. It's not simple. But it is really important to remember that this can affect pretty much anybody because of the different ways that it can show up and the different triggers. The other bit, and Vicky, I know that you can talk more to this, but it's really important to know that what you will often see is other co-occurring support needs or mental health challenges that sit alongside hoarding behaviours or hoarding disorder. So you may well see OCD as well, and that can be quite tricky to distinguish. But you will see as well this coexistence of neurodivergence or suspected neurodivergence and other particular health needs. We'll whiz through this. You've already covered the fact it was previously seen as a subset of OCD. But I think the bits that we really wanted to highlight here is that there is no quick fix. There really isn't. But earlier intervention is definitely something that we would advocate for where possible, rather than only responding when things hit crisis level. The bit about clearances, we will come on to that a little bit more, but we just want to highlight that on its own really it doesn't serve individuals or communities particularly well as a strategy. And then there is this whole sort of wealth of shame and stigma that comes alongside this particular area of support. Often that's as a result of, well, what do we know as individuals? Well, we consume information that's out there in the media, and for many, our understanding around hoarding comes from the quite sensationalist television programs, and that's not anybody's fault. If that's all you've been served in terms of information, and that's why awareness raising about what it is and what it isn't and how it can look, and that not everybody is, floor to ceiling, but it still can cause a level of distress and loss of functionality. And the final bit, and I think this sometimes is news for people or confusing, but there is no nice guidelines, around what is it that should, as best practice, be offered here. And that's why individuals often end up falling between the gaps, because they're seen as too layered, too complicated for talking therapies, but not necessarily complex enough for more critical community-based support. So, anything you wanted to add to that, Vicky?
Nope, that's absolutely perfect. Thank you.
Fabulous. Right. We wanted to make sure that you had something a little bit more interactive. So we wanted to show you a very brief film that's produced by our wonderful colleagues at Kino Bino and Hoarding UK as well, which is different to us. We just wanted to show you this and see how you feel afterwards. It is quite powerful.
A mental health professional once said to me, "Just stop buying 2 newspapers a day," as if that simple advice was going to be a solution to my decades-long problem. I am a person with hoarding behaviour, and I feel the urge to buy and keep newspapers. Hoarding is a huge problem in our society, affecting around 1.4 million people in the UK alone. Yet it's largely hidden from view, and, as in my case, it can ruin lives, relationships, and your sense of self. My life stopped in 1999 when I lost 2 children, one child in a miscarriage and another to a cot death. I blamed myself. These unimaginable losses, compounded by an earlier traumatic experience, suddenly made it impossible to function. At first, I could not let go of my children's clothes, milk bottles, everything they had touched. Then, I began to buy newspapers and magazines, obsessively searching for articles about babies who had passed away, trying to understand why these bad things happened and to accept that I was not immune. Eventually, my world got smaller and smaller. Although it felt like a safe nest, I was confined to a square of space in my house, surrounded mainly by stacks of newspapers and magazines. And for all the feeling of safety that hoarding gave me, it took away so much more. I isolated myself from those close to me, my husband, my other children and friends. I stopped inviting people over, always making excuses. Most of my house was inaccessible. I lived off sandwich meal deals and canned drinks. My house had also become a fire hazard, endangering not only me, but potentially my neighbours. The thing to remember is that no one wants to live like this. I tried to seek help, but most professionals didn't have enough awareness or experience with this behaviour. Housing authorities regularly sent officers over to help clear up my house, but as well-intentioned as these interventions often were, they only magnified my shame. As soon as I touched some of the items, I felt the need to retell my story, which was incredibly painful. It wasn't until I finally received the right support that I came to realise that all this stuff is my trauma, and I understood why clear-ups were so triggering and why they're not a solution to the hoarding problem. Only about 5% of people with hoarding behaviour ask for help, often because of shame. Other times, people simply don't realise they have a problem or lose sight of just how negatively this impacts their lives. For many years, I felt too vulnerable and ashamed to seek help again, until I faced eviction. And at that time, I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I met a wonderful team of people who worked tirelessly to understand this behaviour and raise awareness about it. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone was on my side. I started to attend group support sessions where I realised that I wasn't the only person in the world who hoarded. Some of the shame I carried had been lifted. And with time, I was able to start letting go of some of the things I held on to for so long. I threw a lot away and kept some in storage. Small steps. Simple pleasures mean so much to me now. A hot cup of tea with buttery toast in the morning. Being able to keep my favourite ice cream in my freezer, which I can now access. Hoarding is often associated with older people, but in truth it doesn't discriminate. It can affect anyone. Over 90% of people who hoard have at least one other condition, such as obsessive-compulsive disorder or bipolar disorder. I have been diagnosed with OCD and post-traumatic stress disorder. If you're worried about your own behaviour, there are support groups that can help. For me, it was starting small, working on sorting and throwing things away 15 minutes at a time. Otherwise, it was too overwhelming. Imagine stacks of newspapers that you need to comb through. It's hard to know where to start. If you're wondering how to broach the subject with someone you're concerned about, you can use a hoarding clutter scale, designed to compare someone's home with a series of images to help start the conversation. Always include a person in every decision and offer a choice, so change doesn't feel like something that is done to them. How we talk about hoarding matters hugely. I don't say, I'm a hoarder. This can be a very stigmatizing word, when in fact, hoarding is not something that defines me. What it actually is a coping mechanism, a need to protect myself from the world. I hope that one day everyone will be able to see past the behaviour and understand that people who hoard are not lazy or dirty, but rather deeply wounded human beings who need support and understanding.
Oh, I still get goosebumps from that video. It's very difficult to produce something like this and not sort of fall into generalizing, because every single individual who experiences these things, that it's unique. It is unique, but I think this for us is a really helpful resource in being able to very briefly convey some key things and emotions. But we also want to make sure that we don't forget about loved ones, because that's a really important area that we want to come on to. So, Vicky.
Thank you. So when we're thinking about, again, what hoarding is and the different types of hoarding that you may see, what I always say in practice is, if anybody ever comes and asks and tells me that they're working with somebody who's living a really full and busy home and maybe displaying hoarding behaviours, I always ask them to say, what's the theme? What are you seeing? Tell me what you're seeing. And I think when we think about that video we've just watched, that lady had a story. She openly said that the things that she kept was everything related to her children, the grief that she was experiencing around the loss of children, and anything that the children had touched, and anything in the news relating to something about children. So people always look for the theme, because you may see that the items that people are collecting are because of that emotional need, the sentimental, fear-based, worrying about letting something go, worrying about forgetting something. So they keep items to help instill those memories and help them remember for that emotional need. Could be quite functional. So again, that just in case, I might need that piece of wood, I might need that tool, I've seen that, I'm going to use that to mend the fence. Digital, that functional item of thinking, I may really need that later on, that might help, or it's going to help me fix my computer, or I might run out of this, or what if they stop making it and selling it? Again, and think about what that person maybe did for a job as well. This may fit with somebody's past life. Somebody worked in a factory and was an electrician or made a mend of things. This may fit in with their life story. You may see that it's about identity and control. So things that they like, things that make them feel who they are. It's a passion, it's an interest to them. Things about somebody who may like artwork, may collect lots of art resources. That's how they express their emotion. People may collect things because they genuinely look absolutely beautiful. Some of the things that people collect are absolute treasures, and people sometimes just end up with a lot of these things. So again, look for the theme. Animal hoarding is something that is on the rise. There isn't that much research out there about it at the minute. There's little bits popping up, but again, that comes with lots of different concerns for the animals, for the individual themselves, lots of hazards in the home, and then wet hoarding, again, less common, significantly less research around it, where people, you may encounter environments where people are collecting bodily fluids or sanitary items, things like that. But really important that we look for the theme. What are we seeing, and how does this help us understand somebody's story? Again, leading on to the why. Again, looking at that video again, it's a why. What is somebody's home environment and what you're seeing, and how, and the items they're living around? What's it telling you about their story? And thinking about trauma, loss, bereavement, thinking how somebody may be processing that grief. It could be early childhood experiences, those attachments that people may or may not develop in their early childhood. Some may be really healthy attachments, some may be quite disorganized attachments. Anxiety and worry. Again, we talked about people worrying that things may not exist later in life, or that they can't find items, or just that general difficulty in regulating that underlying emotion of anxiety. We touched on a little bit before about sometimes people having that coexisting mental health difficulty. It could be possible around the genetic side of it and the neurological factors. There's the aspect of learnt behaviour. People may have grown up in households where they weren't able to see the kitchen floor, or they weren't able to get into rooms because there was so many possessions in the property. And we said there about coexisting mental health conditions and how they may impact on the why somebody's engaged in this behaviour.
Thanks, Vicky. I mean, we are literally doing a whistle stop here. There is so much we could unpack around all of these, and we're trying to give you the sort of the key nuggets, if you like. But the impact of hoarding, and I would imagine there are many people in the room today who have their own experience, either lived experience or through the work that you do, or because you're aware of a loved one or a family member or neighbour. So some of these will be, I think, probably things that you're very familiar with. But what we often hear is about the absolute isolation and loneliness. You know, people have stopped letting people into their homes. They feel quite disconnected. The stigma and the shame, it's a secret. People don't want to talk about it, or avoid the conversations. And there are actual real health implications as well, around isolation and loneliness. You know, there's research to suggest that, you know, that chronic loneliness and being disconnected from society and, you know, meaningful connections could be the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And it, you know, so there is real concern, other than it just being, you know, very sad. It genuinely has a physical health impact too. There is real challenges around family relationships. We often hear about complete relationship breakdown, or young people who are now the adult children who have grown up in very full homes, who, for their own reasons and validating their own feelings, have felt the need to cut off those relationships. It is very, very tricky. And so one of the things that we do as an organisation is we look at how can we support relationships, and where there is a desire to reconnect, you know, how can we support and foster that? We've talked, Vicky touched on this about, you know, the blueprint for children. That can be a knock-on effect. So you often then start to see that, you know, there's generations, and that certainly exists in my family too. There are generation after generation where hoarding behaviours were very clearly, you know, you're seeing that as a sort of pattern. Of course, in the moment, there are functional challenges, and those things cannot be ignored. And sometimes those things have got to be the primary focus. You know, how do we make sure that basic need is being met for an individual, but particularly for dependents and those who may be other vulnerable adults living in a home. And then we have the other associated health impacts, but the real fire risk, and we really need to highlight this, the real concerns around safety that can accompany when things have just continued to build. And hoarding behaviours is insidious, so, you know, it will start somewhere and then it will just continue to grow. And then obviously repairs too.
Just to mention, Kat and Victoria, we've got about a quarter of an hour left. So just I didn't know if you had a clue on the time, so I thought I would just let you know. Thank you.
Thank you. We could talk about this all day. We knew this might happen. Thank you.
So we'll very briefly, when is something not hoarding? Because sometimes a house that is very full can present as, you know, well, of course that's hoarding behaviours, but actually it's not always. And it's really important to distinguish what the driver is. So actually the attachments and the level of distress is a really big clue here. And sometimes what you can be seeing is that someone's struggling with just being able to work out how to manage their home environment. That may be about an executive functioning challenge. It may be that actually their world has stopped because they are sat in so much grief and depression that they just cannot move forward. Vicky will talk more about self-neglect, but there are things to unpack here where, you know, if you don't know the story, if you don't start to sort of inquire and be inquisitive and just very respectfully explore, how have we got here? You can just make assumptions, and that can be quite dangerous to label something something that it isn't. So, why clearances fail? We're going to just very quickly cover this, aren't we, Vicky?
We are, yes. So I think we touched on it a little bit ago. Kat made the point that a very high percentage of clean and clears, or as we say, approaches, they don't work. They don't serve that purpose for that individual. Yes, it may offer the quick fix, but for that individual, we have to really consider the level of trauma that this will cause somebody. We've talked already about that attachment to items that people feel, that emotional attachment to things, and the distress that people may feel when those items are suggested that they leave that house or leave that person's sight or possession, let alone when they're taken. It will instill masses loss of control, violation, emotional collapse, continued difficulties with engagement if people feel that every time somebody's going to enter their home to offer support and everything just goes, it will absolutely hinder engagement longer term. Loss of trust, damaged relationships, and it you're giving somebody an empty space to refill because you are not dealing with the underlying reasons as to why somebody's engaged in this behavior in the first instance. And people have to be ready. The evidence that we do know around engaging people who live in really full and busy homes is about that therapeutic relationship based working with somebody, understanding their journey, understanding their needs, understanding how we can navigate a way forward collaboratively. Now, this isn't to say that we do recognise that there are situations out there that are incredibly high risk. And whilst we absolutely advocate for that trauma informed model of working, there may be times when more immediate action is needed to keep somebody safe and other people that live in that house, or even neighbours when we're thinking about terraced houses. But we have to really think about what good quality support looks like. Kat?
Beautiful segue there. Thank you, Vicky. Yeah. I mean, there's so much more that we can say about clearances, but what is good quality support? Well, again, we can't unpack all of this, so we're just going to give you the headlines. But we often talk about harm reduction. Well, what does that mean? It does not mean that we're looking at turning someone's home into, an Instagrammable like perfection. It's about going, well, what is it that's the absolute essential here? How do we make sure that they can live safely in their home, that they can move around, that they have the air quality that they need, that we're preventing slips, trips, falls, and risk of fire, for instance. If they needed to be evacuated from their home, can emergency services get in with the equipment that they would need? It's that type of thing that we're looking for. And does it need to be every room in the house? Is it just about focusing on, let's get some functionality into some key areas so they can use a working bathroom, kitchen, somewhere to sleep? Of course, we're going to promote trauma-informed, person-centered. It's got to be, where possible, led by the choice and autonomy and decision-making of that individual, because without that, that will cause that whole, the lid to flip, if you like, on their brain and their nervous system, and they will feel that this is a threat to my safety. We've talked about respectful language, but it's definitely very much, we would say, look at what the individual is saying, what words are they using, how are they describing things, and then follow that lead. MDTs, Vicky, that's really
Absolutely.
final kind of part. This can't be one organisation's or one individual's issue. It absolutely takes a village, doesn't it? And this is about not reducing it to this is a housing issue or an environmental health issue. Actually, it's a very holistic thing that covers all of these different areas. And we're on the final bit.
So this is just it's a fantastic depiction of that harm reduction that we talked about. So this was provided by Buckinghamshire Fire Service for us, and it's just indicating that if we can work with people, not every room, it's about making safe use of a home. If we can work with somebody so that they can close their doors, so that they can open and close their front door, so they can get in and out, people can get in and out, and so that should there be a fire in that property, which in properties that are really busy and full, there is a very high risk, that actually if we close doors and work towards that goal, it's how that fire can be stopped, or at least the impact of that fire can be delayed while steps are taken. And I think this was a depiction there about the room that was set alight or on fire versus here's the door that's shut and here's the bedroom. We can see that bedroom, yet maybe smoke damage and other things that have happened as a result of the bigger fire, but the fire was prevented from spreading to other areas of the house. So again, that harm reduction model.
Quite impactful, isn't it?
Yeah.
So our last words of kind of input around support that works in practice. Vicky, do you want to do very quickly therapeutic approaches, because we've talked about risk reduction really?
We have. So it's about kindness, compassion, and the language that we use, as Kat's touched on before, about understanding the person's journey, understanding them, taking that holistic approach. This is not something that's happened overnight. There is reason and meaning to the volume of items that you're seeing and that person's living around. So understanding how we can therapeutically engage somebody is absolutely key. Move away from that stigma, move away from the negative language, and really try and work with that person at their own pace where possible.
But at the moment, there are no sort of specific therapeutic modalities in the UK, other than a notion that potentially sometimes CBT approaches may be able to offer some support, but it's not a universal, this works for everyone, because it's so dependent on individual experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. And the other bit that we would really promote as well, if nothing else, is that any kind of support has to be based on, you know, that relational approach, having a trusting relationship with at least one person can really pay dividends. And then in terms of what is available, well, not everywhere, but in many places, you do have peer support options that you can look at in terms of loved ones being able to go to those spaces. But we also provide online support completely free of charge, not just for individuals who experience challenges around their relationships with their possessions, but loved ones too. So there's a very dedicated space for loved ones to come to speak safely and openly and you know that you aren't alone. And that is such a powerful approach. We can't tell you how much of an impact that's had for so many. And then we just wanted to make sure that we ended on showing you your local hoarding protocol, didn't we, Vicky?
Yeah, so this was just a quick snapshot of your self-neglect and hoarding policy or guide that is on, I think it was the Safeguarding Adults Board website for Northumberland County Council. A few different links there to the fire service as well. Just things that you can, if you wanted to, I think the slides or a pack has been put together for you or everybody that's attended, just to have a look through if you're wanting to seek some additional guidance and support. Yeah, that's us. That's our whistle-stop tour of a presentation.